Dublin in Café du Journal with Helena Byrne. And she's an Irish storyteller and singer. And hello, Helena.
Hello, thank you very much for meeting me.
It's great that we could make it happen. So you're a performer since early childhood. It says on your website since you are knee-high. Yeah.
Absolutely, yes.
But since 10 years you're an Irish storyteller?
Yeah,
singer?
or probably even more than 10 now. I'm starting to lose count.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how did this calling to perform, to tell stories and sing reveal itself to you?
Accidentally, really, to be honest. I was always performing when I was a child. I loved singing, I loved acting, so I was always performing in one way or another. And when I moved to Dublin, it would have been 2010 maybe, or thereabouts, I started working as a tour guide. And I would add in little stories into the tour here and there, and I just found that I loved it. I absolutely loved it, because storytelling is so different from when you're acting on the stage. When you're acting on the stage, there's a fourth wall, and the audience, you're not supposed to pay attention to the audience as such. Whereas with storytelling, you're making eye contact, it's very interactive, and I just found that I really loved it. So it just grew and grew from there, really.
And then how did you become an Irish storyteller? That is a storytelling with a huge tradition.
Yeah.
And how were you trained, or how did you learn it?
I learned it the hard way by making a lot of mistakes. And I suppose I had a little bit of talent for storytelling. And because I had experience in front of an audience, that helped me as well. But really, it's you figure out what works for you as a storyteller. There are so many different styles of storytelling. And I mean, I was a resident storyteller for a show in the Brazen Head pub in Dublin for many years. And when I started there, I was the only woman. All of the other storytellers were men in their 50s and 60s.
Oh, really?
And then I was in my mid-20s at the time. And the script that I was given was obviously the script that the men had written. And for the first few shows, I was trying to work from that script and tell the stories in their style, in the other storyteller style. And I quickly learned, no, that doesn't work, because a joke that a 60-year-old male storyteller might have might not work the same way for me as a 25, 26-year-old woman. So I really sort of had to learn my own style then, which sort of just comes by trial and error. That show was a great experience for me, because I was doing shows 3 or 4 times a week. And it was really a good learning curve. If the show must go on, if a story doesn't work out, you've got to bounce back and win them over with the next story. It's kind of like a comedian who gets out on the stage and nobody laughs. You've got to really just work on it and learn what works. So that was a long-winded answer. My apologies.
No. That's very interesting. So you also mentioned that you heard the stories from others, because I learned that the Irish storytelling is a very long oral tradition.
It really
Originally,
is. Yes.
They have been handed over only by
orally passed down. Absolutely, yeah.
And where did you get your stories from? I mean, nowadays we have the books, but how do you choose them? Did you love to hear them from others, and then you think, oh, that works good? Or
yeah, it's been a mixture. It's really been a mixture. I would sometimes get stories from interviewing people. Like you mentioned before we started recording that you went to some nursing homes to speak to older people. I've done the same here in Ireland. It's the older generation that have a plethora of stories to share. So I love speaking with them and getting more of an insight into Ireland in times past. But also then, of course, in Ireland, thankfully, we do have quite a good resource of folklore collections, stories that have been written down and passed down through the generations. So it's a little mixture of both, really. I love speaking with people, but I love digging into a book at the same time. So it's all of those combined. And then, you kind of know when a story is going to work for you, because if you get excited while you're describing the story to somebody, even before you're performing it, if you're reading it and you're getting excited, you know it's kind of going to work for you. So yeah, that's basically how I gather them. So a mixture of different ways. Yeah.
I have read about this project of yours. It's called Stirring Memories.
Oh yeah.
Where you went to these daycare centers.
I did, yes.
And you spoke with them and they came up with old stories about their neighborhood.
Exactly. And that was so much fun. And I think the older community really enjoyed it as well, because especially since COVID. I mean, during COVID, I know it was the same in Germany as it was in Ireland, where everyone had to stay at home. Those little interactions that you have with people, even if you're just going to buy the newspaper and you can just talk about the weather, just a little comment or something like that, that just shut down completely. And I think a lot of people realise the importance of face-to-face interaction. It's all well and good to get a message on Facebook or, WhatsApp or whatever, but actually communicating with people face-to-face, there's just something else about it. It's different. So yeah, these older people shared a lot of stories about their personal lives, how they met their husbands or their wives, and the various dance halls that would have been around this area. This is South Dublin that we're in, so Dunleary and Bray in County Wicklow, they would have had lots of really wonderful dance halls. And some of the stories are just so funny and charming. And yeah, for those sort of stories, you wouldn't get the same flavour from a book. It's when you're speaking with the people and you have the Dublin accent and the Dublin charm that goes with it. Some of it's quite difficult, yes.
English,
even for me sometimes. So yeah, there was one woman that I spoke with, and she was telling me how she had met her husband at a dance hall, and I asked her, was it love at first sight? Did you see him across the room? And she said, oh no, I didn't like him at all. And in her Dublin accent, I mean, I can't even do it justice. But yeah, it's those really lovely stories and the way that they were told by these people that make them really special, I think. So yeah.
It makes them special because they preserve this knowledge for the rest of us people who live here. Well, I'm not living here, but for the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it's giving appreciation and some kind of good feeling to the elderly.
Absolutely.
Because they can speak about it.
Yeah, and they get to reminisce, and we get an insight into life before, online dating, when you actually had to just go to a dance hall and meet somebody.
Somebody.
Yeah.
That's really great. That was a very inspiring project.
It was really enjoyable. Yeah.
Storytelling. And then back to the Irish stories. You are an Irish storyteller, and that's called a Seanchaí.
Seanchaí, yes.
Seanchaí. What is this function of a Seanchaí? Is there a special function to the community?
There is, and it's changed throughout the years. But essentially, in, we'll say, the 18th and 19th century in Ireland, the Seanchaí would have travelled around the country all the time. So he or she would have been on the road and would stop by the village. In exchange for a roof over their head and a meal at night, they would entertain people at the fireside. So people would come, all of the neighbours would come to the house, and the Seanchaí would entertain them with lots of stories. And it was also like the Seanchaí worked almost like a journalist as well, because they were the ones travelling around the country, so they could say, did you hear what happened in Pina the other day, or Bilton? That person died, this person is getting married, this person is emigrating. So they were really important to the community in that sense. And so today, of course, thankfully I don't have to travel around to the village asking for food in exchange for stories. It's not that bad. Yeah. But there is still that appreciation for stories in Ireland. I think it's evolving and changing with the times, because it has to. Yeah.
It has to, yeah. And it does, fortunately.
Yes.
So the Irish stories, they have these 5 big cycles. I've read that.
That's right. That's in the Irish mythology. Yeah, in Irish mythology we have. There are so many wonderful stories from Irish mythology, and a lot of children in Ireland, myself included, we would have grown up hearing about these stories and being told them. The children of Léir and all of these magical tales. which, there's something about them that really awakens the imagination. A lot of the Irish mythology I would find quite similar to the Grimm's brothers, actually.
Oh, really? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot of, in that they're just fantastical, really fantastical. So you'd have that, and then most of the stories I would tell would be from Irish folklore. And it's an interesting relationship Irish people have with folklore because we take it very seriously. So we don't see them as fairy tales. We see them as true stories.
Oh, really?
And a lot of the Irish superstitions that are even strong today would come from Irish folklore. So there was a belief in the fairies in Ireland, but not the lovely cute fairies, not like Tinkerbell.
No.
They were actually terrifying.
Okay.
Yeah. And but Irish people truly believed in them. So these stories that the Seanchaí or even your grandmother or grandfather would have shared with you, they weren't just nice fairy tales before bedtime. They were stories that would scare you into behaving yourself, really, you know.
The didactic
point. Don't do this or you'll upset the fairies. Don't misbehave or you'll get your comeuppance from the fairy folk. Yeah. So there's those two different elements of the mythology and then the folklore. And that's always they've always kind of coincided. And yeah. So, sorry, I know I keep rambling on. This is me as a storyteller. My apologies.
That's great. That's great. Of course, you don't have to travel around for food and housing.
No, thankfully.
But you travel a lot.
I do. I love traveling.
USA, to Europe, so you're following the tradition.
Yes, exactly, yeah.
You can compare audiences. And I have heard, unfortunately, I've not yet been to a storytelling with Irish folklore, but I've heard that the Irish audience is very empathetic. Is there a difference between the audience in Ireland or in America or in Europe?
I think there is, to a certain degree. I think you have to use different tactics to win over an American audience to an Irish audience, which it's very hard for me to even explain exactly what that difference is. But I suppose with Irish people, they're a little bit more difficult to impress and win over at the beginning, simply because every Irish person feels they're a storyteller.
Okay.
So you're you need to be really, really good to win them over, because every Irish person has the gift of the gab. They're all able to put on a little bit of a show. Whereas Americans, I think, particularly, I'm quite fortunate in that because I'm an Irish storyteller, and Americans have a really strong appreciation for Irish culture. So I find them a little bit more, easy to sort of draw in from the beginning. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what nationality your audience are, because a good story is a good story, no matter where they're from or who they are. If you've got a good story, you'll manage to win them over. Yeah. So it varies just ever so slightly, but overall, people love good stories. So yeah, that's the bottom line.
Yeah, very good. Very good. So my last question would be, what would you recommend to start when somebody is interested in Irish storytelling? Which stories would you recommend to start with?
Oh, wow. To start with, my goodness, there's just so many. I would say, I would probably start with W.B. Yeats. William Butler Yeats. He gathered a lot of Irish folk tales back in his day. So I would probably start by delving into a little bit of his work. And a lot of his poetry would have been influenced by Irish folklore as well. So maybe I suppose I would start there, because his collection of stories gives you a good basis into Irish folklore, and it touches on the Irish mythology as well. And also I suppose I would just say, nowadays, thank God, you can go on YouTube so easily. And I would say go onto YouTube, look up Eddie Lenihan, look up Eamon Kelly, all of these wonderful storytellers, just to give yourself an idea of the style and the rhythm of Irish storytelling, because there's a real wit about Irish stories. So just expose yourself to as much as possible, I would say. And don't rule anything out until you find that one part of Irish culture or the Irish storytelling that draws you. Because you might find some storytellers that love the Irish mythology and they love those big, huge, epic stories. I mean, there are so many wonderful storytellers who... Actually, one storyteller, Niall de Burca, he's quite a tall man. He's got a real presence on the stage, and he gets up there and he's doing monsters' voices and all sorts of, he's talking about wars and battles, and everything is very animated and everything. And then I go for the fairy folk, which is totally, totally different, but both are equally Irish. So yeah, I would just say just expose yourself to everything you can and then narrow it down to what you feel a passion towards.
Yeah, okay, great. And also a good place to start is the albums you have edited or published.
Well, yeah, not to plug my own work, but yes.
No, but I will give some links in the show notes.
Wonderful, yeah.
The podcast, so who's interested can find also some material there.
Absolutely.
Helena, thank you so much for taking your time.
Not at all. Thank you.
And perhaps we will meet in Bühne or Hanover. You
Yeah.
come to our storytelling festival.
I would love to. My God, that'd be wonderful. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you very much.